Moving on to the next segment of today's show, I wanted to talk about what could have been the game of the week in the NFL in week 2. Sunday Night Football, the Baltimore Ravens, led by Lamar Jackson and coach John Harbaugh, somehow, someway, find a way to get the W, to move to 1-1 as they beat the Chiefs in a comeback win by a final score of 36-35. And I was so impressed with not only the way Lamar Jackson played in this game, but really the competitive spirit that he was able to show for this Baltimore Raven team. And really, I was just impressed with the way the Ravens were able to fight back in this game against what I think is the best team in the AFC. And when you consider the circumstances, this could have been the best win and biggest win of Lamar Jackson's career. And let me explain why. I'm not going to lie. You guys heard me say it on last week's show. Going into this game, I was a little bit concerned about the Baltimore Ravens, just because every year in the NFL, we see a team in training camp towards the end, right before the season is about to start, just get decimated by injuries. You guys know the Ravens lose Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins and Justice Hill and also Marcus Peters, some of the more important players in that locker room. And when you combine that with the way the Ravens played in week 1, and I totally understand. I picked the Raiders on that Monday night game to win, and the Ravens defense really didn't impress me in that game. I was disappointed in the way that Don Wink Martindale, someone who usually is one of the better defensive coordinators in the NFL, someone who has been rightfully considered for some NFL head coaching jobs over the last couple of years, he failed to adjust in that game by blitzing and throwing the house at Derek Carr for literally the whole entire game. And the 2 times the Raiders thought that they had won, if you remember, Carr hit Bryan Edwards for what was thought to be the game-winning touchdown. He ultimately was stopped at the 1-yard line, and the Raiders ended up throwing an interception on that drive, but later they get the ball back in overtime, and they find a way to get the win. The Ravens were blitzing at Derek Carr the whole game, and he was just picking them apart. And going into this game, Lamar Jackson, as great of a career that he has had so far since he's gotten to the NFL, he's won an MVP, he's won a playoff game, he has been one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in the NFL. He has not been able to beat Patrick Mahomes before this past Sunday Night Football's game. And I think when it comes to Lamar Jackson, it's weird because we all agree he is one of the 8 best quarterbacks in the league. And when you watch him play, his athleticism just pops directly off of your TV screen. And as time has gone on, I feel like the more and more people he's been proving wrong, and the more and more people who watch him end up saying, wow, this guy, even though he has some flaws, is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and he could play for my team any day of the week. But early on in this game, I'm not going to lie, when Lamar was out here throwing interception after interception to Tyrann Mathieu, if you remember in the first quarter, the Honey Badger brought it back all the way for a pick 6, which ended up giving Kansas City the early lead. And until Baltimore scored that late touchdown, that ended up being the difference in the game. What I was so impressed with when it comes to Baltimore in this spot was their competitive spirit. There were many times, especially when you're playing a team like Kansas City, that you could just give up and you just say, wow, this Chiefs offense is so dynamic, they're so good, they're so hard to stop, and the Ravens easily could have just caved in and lost this game. But what ultimately was the difference here was the competitive spirit that Lamar Jackson was able to show in this spot. And you could tell, I noticed it really directly when he threw that jump touchdown pass to Hollywood Brown. He was going absolutely nuts. The scene and the atmosphere in Baltimore looked unreal. If you remember the actor who played Omar from The Wire, a show that took place in Baltimore, the Raven fans were doing the whistling to honor him. Ray Lewis was in the building. Not only did he get the Ravens crowd super hyped up, but they zoomed in on Chiefs quarterback Patrick Mahomes after Ray came out, and you could tell Pat was like, wow, I'm hyped up. I'm ready to play. And Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, when they were not even close to 100% healthy, they find a way to take that direct punch from Kansas City and somehow, some way, find a way to win. And going into this season, I had been on the record saying that the AFC is more deep and more competitive than it's ever been. There are so many teams, I think, that are really close in the AFC when it comes to talent, and that's what makes the NFL such a great sport. When you look at all of the teams in the NFC North, they are all 1-1. The Bengals, the Browns, the Steelers, and the Ravens. All four of those teams have had some nice, impressive wins. They're all 1-1. The only two teams in the AFC that have a record of 2-0 right now are the Las Vegas Raiders and the Denver Broncos. If you would have said at the beginning of the season that the only two remaining 2-0 teams after 2 weeks would both be from the AFC West, odds are most people would have said it's Kansas City and it's the Chargers. A lot of people were very high on this young Charger team going into the season, and we're going to get into their game against the Dallas Cowboys a little bit later on in the show. But those two teams in the AFC are now 2-0. And I think the AFC conference as a whole is just so deep and it's just so competitive. And I was so impressed with Lamar Jackson and his competitive spirit that he was able to show in this game against the Kansas City Chiefs. And really, that's what he's done throughout his whole career. Many people labeled Lamar Jackson coming out of college as a running back. And he is now one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And he is an elite talent. When it comes to Lamar Jackson, I've said this a lot. I don't understand why immediately when he comes up in conversations, a lot of the times people will just immediately point to his weaknesses, right? I totally understand that when it comes to just throwing the football, Lamar Jackson isn't the best at that. But he is the best running quarterback I have ever seen. And we saw in this game, that's what it took for the Ravens to win. And one thing, a couple things actually, I will give Coach Harbaugh credit for is a lot of times when it comes to Kansas City, right? We all know how dynamic their offense is. And by the way, if you're a Chiefs fan, I'm not totally panicking. I still think right now you are the best team in the AFC. And when this game is played, I would say 8 out of 10 times, odds are you're going to win. Mahomes had a really good game. Kelsey had that great touchdown. But Mahomes made a costly interception in the fourth quarter. Tyreek Hill was shut down for basically the whole game. Shout out to the Ravens secondary for doing that. We saw last week, Cleveland will tell you that is not an easy thing to do. And the Baltimore Ravens found a way to win. But Coach Harbaugh was really the first coach that I have seen since Kansas City and Mahomes became this unstoppable force that used the formula of if you run the ball and keep Patrick Mahomes off the field, you could really win. What I have seen previously, and I think we saw it a little bit not only in the Week 1 game for Kansas City against Cleveland, but also in that playoff game against Cleveland last year, was that even though Cleveland is a really good team when it comes to running the football, it doesn't matter because Patrick Mahomes could just strike at any time, in any moment. We saw that big, long touchdown that he threw to Tyreek Hill in that game against Cleveland in Week 1, and Coach Harbaugh said, we're running the ball right down Kansas City's throats. I think if you're a Chief fan, that is really the number one concern you have after this game, is that your defense, especially in the front seven, against Ravens backups on the offensive line, the one guy I didn't even mention for Baltimore that didn't play in this game was Ronnie Stanley, their left tackle who got hurt towards the back end of last year, and the Ravens still paid him a big contract. They actually paid him the contract and he got hurt literally the next game. I feel bad for that guy. But Al Villanueva, the former Steeler, that got absolutely abused by the Raiders defensive end Max Crosby in Week 1, he stepped up. Patrick McCarry, who was moved to right tackle, he stepped up. And I said when it came to the Ravens, if they can't block, I don't know how they're going to win football games. Luckily for them, in this game, they were able to block and they were able to win. And Lamar Jackson deserves so much credit. He said after the game, the noise will go away, then we'll come back somehow. It's going to always be like that as long as I'm playing, so I don't really care about it. I'm just going to keep playing. And leading up to the game, Lamar Jackson downplayed any personal rivalry that he had with Patrick Mahomes. But let's face it, if the Baltimore Ravens want to be considered one of the top contenders in the AFC, this was a game that they had to have. I remember watching these two teams play in Baltimore on Monday Night Football last year, and going into the game, the Ravens were talking. They made it known how personal it was with them in Kansas City and how much they wanted to beat the Chiefs, and the Chiefs just boat raced them. And when it comes to Patrick Mahomes and his history in the month of September, he threw his first interception in the month of September in this game. And ultimately, that's what was the turning point. I wasn't really impressed with the young pass rusher Baltimore drafted Owe from Penn State. He was a huge difference maker in this game. Baltimore was also missing Rashad Bateman, the young wide receiver from Minnesota, who they drafted in the first round, that they were expecting to make a big-time impact, but he was injured. So Lamar Jackson just said, you know what, Hollywood Brown? You know what, Sammy Watkins? You guys are going to be my go-to guys tonight. And that one Hollywood Brown touchdown was really nice. If you remember, Hollywood last year was in the news for complaining about how the Ravens used him offensively. I think he's okay with it now. And it was just such a big win for Lamar Jackson. I was so impressed with his competitive spirit and how he was able to go head-to-head with Patrick Mahomes, and somehow, some way, the Ravens defense made enough plays to get them the win in this spot, and hopefully this gives them confidence going forward. The Ravens are a team that has a lot to play for. I did say that going into the season, this was a team that, given all of the injuries they had, I thought they may be in trouble. But you look at their next three games, at Detroit, at Denver, home against Indianapolis. If they could go 2-1 in that stretch, let's see what happens. Hopefully they get healthier and healthier throughout the season. Right now, if you ask me, are the Ravens a playoff team? Yes or no? It's really hard to say. I'm leaning no just because of the amount of injuries. I don't know if it's sustainable, but at the same time, I didn't think there was any way the Ravens were going to be able to beat the Chiefs on Sunday Night Football. And I understand usually in most circumstances, if the game played out the way it did, Kansas City would have won. But forcing that fumble on Clyde Edwards-Helaire was the difference. And if you're a Chief fan, we'll get into this in a later episode, I'd be officially worried about him. If you're drafting a running back in the first round, you guys know how I feel. It has to be an impact player in order for the pick to work out. Right now, that pick isn't looking great for the Chiefs, even though technically Edwards-Helaire was a first-round pick. So when I look at the Baltimore Ravens, they're going to be a fascinating team going forward. They have a game they really should win coming up this week against Detroit, but then next four after that, at Denver, home Indy, home against the Chargers, and then a divisional home game against the Cincinnati Bengals. They don't play Pittsburgh or Cleveland until week 12, and then Baltimore, their later games in the season will be filled with division matchup, so that's going to be good. But once again, it was a heck of a game on Sunday Night Football. Props to Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. Props to Coach Harbaugh for having the confidence in his quarterback to go for it on 4th and 1. And not only that, but to pass with Lamar Jackson on 3rd and 7. That showed me he had absolute faith in his quarterback. What a win by the Ravens. Great job.